Hello, friends. Here we are with Clarke Cheng, right? Um, the author of several books. The one book that got me excited it was, or still is, The Bottleneck Rules, How to Get More Done When Working Harder Isn't Working. A fantastic book. Not only the content, but also the writing style and how it unfolds is just beautiful. So thank you very much. Just a little bit put in the context about myself and why this book means so much to me. I am a software development guy. I've been doing this for about 30 years or so, full time. And the longer I've been doing it, the more I'm noticing these things where everybody's working, doing their best, like you say, working hard, but somehow things are not moving. Why is the needle stuck, et cetera, et cetera? And you, as you nicely put in your book, we are kind of conditioned not to see those. Once you see those obvious things, it's almost like, if you remember in the old days, they had the posters where everything looks jumbled, but when you kind of squint and tilt your head, all of a sudden, hey, look, it's a dinosaur, it's a spaceship, blah, blah, blah.
That's a very good analogy.
And so your book, I think, talks about that. Once you see them, they cannot be unseen. And I would like to hand it over to you. Whatever you want to talk about, you can talk about how you came from the goal to your book, etc., or whatever else. Everything will be.
Okay, all right. So how about if I start with a misconception? And I almost would, if I was starting again, I'd almost have a different subtitle for the book. I'm not quite sure what it would be. But if you look at most productivity books or methodologies out there, that almost all of them are aimed at the individual. Getting things done, so they make it, make a list and do things. You've got all sorts of these things, all sorts of books about the psychology of stuff, prioritizing and all of that stuff. When you've got more than one person or more than one resource working together, though, that the dynamics change. And probably the easiest analogy is if you've ever been stuck driving up a hill, a single lane hill with a slow vehicle in front of you, the entire traffic, the entire productivity of all of the vehicles that are behind that slow one are limited by the speed of the fast one. It doesn't matter that they could all go 100 miles an hour. If there's a tractor going halfway up that hill and it's only going 30 miles an hour, that's the limit of everyone. So that's the misconception, is that we think in offices and in factories and on roads, that generally that if we want to get the maximum productivity for everyone, then we actually have to have everyone being productive. But really, when you understand the dynamics of how multiple people and multiple resources work together, that they're limited by very few things. And one of those things could generically be known as a bottleneck.
You did hint at the almost very opening at your book with the Cheers joke, which I thought was a brilliant, and I always like to take one part of that joke, which is the herd of buffaloes.
Yes.
And that to me is the most powerful metaphor, because the only way they survive is to stay in the pack. Otherwise, they're screwed. And to stay in the pack, they need to be sensitive and respectful of the average or of the slowest guys in the pack.
Yes.
And so the athletic guys, the lead in the pack, they need to deliberately slow down. And like you mentioned, sometimes bottlenecks are really useful and are really helpful. So they're not always bad.
No, that's another misconception. And I must admit, I was going to call this, you won't have to beat this out. It's not that bad, but I was going to have a swear word title here. It was going to be Bottlenecks are Bastards. Because it's just because they do cause a lot of damage, but only when they're unmanaged. Once you're managing them, once you've found a wild bottleneck and you tame it and you manage it, they turn into a really, really, really useful thing. They become the most important. You suddenly be aware that the bottleneck is now the most important person or machine or resource, whatever you want to call it, inside your office. It's a thing that determines how much money you make, or how many user stories you deliver, or how many patients that you serve in your hospital. So it becomes a really important, valuable thing, and it can be used. It can be used rather than a disruptive, invisible thing that's being unmanaged. Once it's managed, it becomes really, really powerful. Can I tell you? There's another bottleneck joke. So I won't repeat the joke from Cheers that's in the book. There's a second bottleneck joke. And it's not overly funny, but it comes from Pulp Fiction, the movie. And anyone who's seen it will probably remember it because it's one of the worst jokes you've ever heard. And it's like 3 tomatoes, a mum tomato, a dad tomato, and a baby tomato are going for a walk. And the baby tomato is going slow. And so they're all slowed down. And the dad gets frustrated. And he walks back to this baby tomato that's walking too slowly and slowing down their entire trip and squishes it and says, ketchup. And it's not really very funny, but it was in the movie. It's a nice play on words. But you would like to think that's what actually happens in a lot of work environments. The slow tomato gets squished and blamed for everything. Ideally, what would happen is that the daddy tomato would wander back and say, here, let me help you go faster. And that's the essence of what the thing is. Rather than blame the bottleneck, help the bottleneck. And then when you help the bottleneck, you help everyone. And not just the people that work in, if it's hospital, say, it's not just the people working inside the hospital where everything gets better because they're all speeding up. They're no longer delayed by the one slow tomato. But the number of patients that get served zooms up and it roars up. And so being able to see bottlenecks is a real force for as a selfish thing. It's a really good skill to have, but it's great, the knock-on effect that you can have for other people.
Yeah, and I think the most powerful formula, which you keep repeating, is focus with many C's.
Yes.
And I can tell you from my experience, maybe somebody else disagrees, but that part of the equation or the formula where you have to coordinate, collaborate, and curate, one where I'm experiencing the most pushback.
It will be, yes.
People like to stay. We all like to stay in a comfort zone. I'm very good at what I'm doing, and I'm faster than anybody else, and I keep pumping, like you say, a lot of material. Meanwhile, other people are drowning around me. They cannot handle it. I'm like, boo-hoo, not my problem. And so taking the formula to heart and saying, look, now that you have delivered what we asked of you, please do not start anything new. Please turn around and help those behind you who are swamped. Maybe, like you say, maybe the daddy tomato would be able to build a little cart and pull the baby tomato instead of squishing it, right? You have, obviously, you are superior in a way. Why don't you use your engineering prowess or whatever, your ingenuity, find a solution, help those. So bottom line word is teamwork.
Yes, yeah, that's it. It's teamwork. Or so I'll just spell that for anyone who's listening. Focus, FOCCUS. So the F is for find the bottleneck, the O is for optimize, and that's what you do when you go, oh, there's a bottleneck there. There's a slow one. Let's have a look, and you go, oh, the poor little baby tomato. He's got bare feet. Why don't we pop some shoes on him? Or his shoelaces aren't tied, and he keeps tripping over. We'll tie his shoelaces, and suddenly the baby tomato can walk a little faster.
Give him a tricycle.
Give him a bicycle. It's just yeah. And when you look at it, you're narrowly focused on that, and it's really easy. It's really so easy because never before have you just looked and go, I only have to fix this one problem, and everything will speed up. So that's good, and it fits with the way we're used to working. It's easy to fix stuff that just involves one person. The 3 C's, I'll come to them in a minute. But the U stands for upgrade, which means, look, buy another machine, hire another person to do the bottleneck work. And we like to leave that till a little bit later And we like to do the thinking clever stuff first, because that's chucking money at things. But sometimes it can be just the really what you want to do. Just go and hire someone, but do a little thinking first, because it's amazing what you can come up with creatively without having to spend money. And then the S is that the idea that if you speed up the tomato, and then suddenly it's the dad that's going too slow, the bottleneck moves. So you'd want to look at it. So the 3 C's are about collaboration more than anything else. I've got one client, one big successful 3,000 developers kind of unicorn client who's using this, and they renamed the 3 C's and they put them under the umbrella of collaboration, which is not quite right, but they found it easier to spell focus with 3 C's, and then just explain sorry, with 1 C rather than the 3. And a friend of mine who taught this stuff in the US Air Force did the same. He taught it, and he summed it up, the 3 C's as collaboration. And if you take what I said at the beginning about it being most productivity stuff focuses on the individual, not the collaboration, that's what these 3 C's are. So first one is the middle one, actually, the middle C is collaboration. And what it says is basically, hey, look, you've got one bottleneck, got loads of other non-bottlenecks. How can they help? And quite often, I can't think of a tomato example, but one that's really common, and where I do a lot of my work is with software teams, in the the head of marketing sponsors the teams, and they have to make big strategic decisions. You've got developers down here, and you've got, say, product people, whatever they might be called, in the flow sort of happening there. And one example of collaboration would be that, say, your head of marketing is actually, no one would think of it this way, but they're actually the bottleneck, because they're so busy, they're trying to do a full-time job, day job, plus guide, make the big hefty decisions for the development team. So if you collaborate, you go, well, everyone else has got more time. Why don't we find some people, and before we go speak to this person, we'll prep stuff. We'll help them. We'll help them by preparing stuff so that they can rather than having to come up with answers on the spot. We've done the research and thinking, and then we can give that to them, save them time, and effectively that's what collaboration is. It's helping the bottleneck by using the non-bottlenecks to do stuff, even if they're maybe not as good as it. So that's the collaboration. The first C is coordination, and that's stuff like, again, take that example, and just imagine you had a head of marketing. In fact, I'll give you a real example of when I did this. It was a head of operations for a government department, and she was just so busy, and we couldn't fight, and she just couldn't keep up and serve her teams. So they were busy building stuff. There was a lot of rework, and a lot of disappointment. And so what we did as a coordination thing was I just said, I don't suppose on Tuesdays and Thursdays you could spare half an hour and just go have office hours for the team, and just go there, just sit in the office next to them, let them know they've got any questions. They've got half an hour, make the most of that time. And she said, and that's effectively a coordination solution. And she goes, oh, I could do that, but what if no one turned up? And there was no chance no one was going to turn up. But I just said, look, if no one turns up, you still do your emails in that time. She goes, oh, okay. So it was no lose for her, but it's really easy for her, in her busy life, to get her assistant to change the coordination mechanisms for how people spoke to her by adding in 2 short meetings. And she did that, and it was incredibly valuable, made a huge difference. And part of the coordination is that their Scrum Master for that team made sure that if people were going to go, that they did a bit of prep beforehand, so that they could really make the most of their time. And the last C is curation, which is the easiest way to explain it is to think of a curator who curates a museum. And in a museum, like, they might have basements full of dead animals and all sorts of things that they could put on display, but they've got very limited display space. So the curator chooses very carefully what they put in that precious display space. So curation here is saying, hey, we've got a bottleneck. We have to be very careful about what work they do and what area we focus so that we make the absolute most of them. And that's the focus for me. There's quite a lot to it, but you were quite insightful when you said about it being about collaboration, because this is the difference between optimizing teams, which require collaboration, lots of people moving together, lots of resources, from meeting rooms to internet speed to number of coffee machines to the number of analysts to the number of how fast the computers are. There's so many things there, but they all run at the speed of the slowest buffalo or the slowest tomato.
Yeah.
And that's why coordination, collaboration, and curation are so important. But going back to your original comment, they're hard because those are muscles in our brains that we don't tend to exercise very much. We tend to be much better at sitting down and doing our own stuff, but creatively coordinating and collaborating requires quite a lot of it can move some people out of their comfort zone, and it can be really hard work. Right, I'll stop talking now.
No, it's excellent. Thank you very much. I think you furnished a lot of killer examples in your book. I would just refer to one because at first I was a little bit unclear on curation part of the C. And then the moment I read your example, which is just brilliant, if we have this limited landing, the bottleneck is the airport because of the weather conditions. You curate by picking and choosing which plane should actually make the trip and land if there's like packed with a lot of passengers, versus a small plane with 2-3 guys. Yeah, they can sit on the tarmac, wait.
Yeah. And you'd rather you didn't have to. But when you do have to, because if you don't have a bottleneck, it doesn't matter. You can do everything. But when you do have a bottleneck, say like in the example in the book was bad weather, causes the airport runway to slow down, and they halve the number of flights they can handle. You therefore probably prioritize the ones that are nearby, and the ones that then have international flights coming in. And then you go, the little tiny one over there, I think they'll have to go land at the other airport. It's disappointing, but hey,
it's what's the word? The act of God, right?
Indeed.
The constraint. Yeah.
And if you think about it,
and you're right. I mean, maybe there's an international flight that's now circling around waiting for, and now maybe they are risking running out of fuel. So let's somehow get them landed.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's
everyone will do this instinctively, but when it's obvious, they'll do it instinctively like that. The killer for most organizations is that they only do it when there's an emergency. Exactly. If you want to rescue a project, they curate. They suddenly manage scope magnificently.
Oh yeah.
But they only do it when there's an urgency. If you can curate as a way of business, it involves saying no to so many things. But that's incredibly powerful. I think all the words in there are really the ones that are more obvious, like coordination. You go, oh yeah, and a lot of people that's our bread and butter. Collaboration, a little bit harder. Curation is really, really, really counterintuitive. No, it's not counterintuitive. It's just not obvious, and it's really, really difficult, but it's hugely powerful.
Yeah, and without examples, like I said, I had personal issues in trying to envision what would I be curating, and I needed an example, and then it was clear. But at first, it was a bit abstract or vague. Yeah, sure, we want to curate, but what does it mean, right? So thank you for the example. It really clarified in my head, right? One thing I just want to quickly throw in, and this is just from my personal experience.
Yeah.
Everywhere I go, and I'm leading and I'm mentoring teams and managing. There is inclination or some kind of a bias or propensity towards optimizing for utilization. So here we are. We have, we are the business. We are investing money into various resources, be it machines, consultants, employees. I mean, nowadays we frown upon calling people resources. So I don't know what the better word is, but let's just sum it up under we're spending money daily. And you can calculate, you can say today we spend this much money, yesterday we spend that much money. And naturally, if we're spending that much money, and we're talking sometimes millions of dollars per day, right? We say, look, I want to get something for this money. And if I hire 10 of these guys and each one is charging me $320 an hour, hey, I want to see them. I want to hear the keyboards clacking. I want to see them utilized. And that's almost like shooting yourself in the foot, because the saying that fully utilized highway turns into a parking lot. Now it's not, right? So it could be counterproductive. And so, but that's natural propensity. We all immediately jump at like, oh yeah, we're getting our money's worth. Are we really getting something for these millions of dollars we're burning daily, right? So, and then when I say, look, but to maximize utilization, we create those bottlenecks, right? And then nothing's moving. And then you are throwing good money after bad money. So what I'm trying to do, and maybe you have a better approach, I say, why don't we switch from optimizing for utilization to optimizing for value delivery?
That's the key. That is the key. But it's also a mindset shift, and it's wired into most of us that if we're not busy, then we're not productive.
Yeah,
and that's the curse of it. It's actually so. My grandmother, before she passed away, she went in an old folks' home, and she had dementia. So she wasn't really there so much. But she'd always been busy, and she carried with her this need to be busy. And so the staff would bring her knives and forks, cutlery, and they'd pop them down next to her, and she would keep herself busy just putting them in order. And once she'd done that, they would just take them and just pop them aside, and she'd just do the same again and again. And I mean that was sad, but it was built in that she had to be busy. And now it so happens that my wife is an old age psychiatrist, and she said that that's actually quite a. I don't think it's not a formal diagnosis, but she said that sometimes people know it as utilization syndrome, and some people carry it through, and it can just be an innate part of our wiring that we have to be busy. So even if we focus on value, even if we focus absolutely on delivering value, it can be really unnerving and frustrating if you're not busy all the time. But if you are busy all the time, I can guarantee you're not delivering value. If I can just imagine, so I've just got back from my gym, and it's a gym where you only go there if you have a personal trainer there. So it's very much focused on value, not keeping all the machines busy. So when you're there, they deliberately don't have loads of people in there, because everyone that's going is paying premium prices anyway. But you don't have to stand there and wait. If they wanted to, they could get lots and lots more people in and just have lots of people waiting for the machines to use them all the time. But they focus instead on the value that they offer through personal training, and they probably make more money, and everyone pays more money, and you get a better experience. But their gym looks really quiet, and that's actually really quite appealing. But if you've got loads of people waiting for machines, and it's going to be a totally different culture, totally different atmosphere. And it may deliver more value, it may deliver less. But actually, I'm just saying that just to demonstrate that the more people you pack in there, it's really easy to see that you will create queues and having people to wait.
And that's like, I come from Europe originally, and me arriving in North America, the new world, One
Yes.
thing I've noticed is something I call, this is going to sound harsh, but that's my formulation, the terror of jobs. Here, everybody must have a job at all times.
Mm-hmm.
Where I come from, okay, you want to have a career, you want to have, but not everybody is mandated from the time you turn 15 to immediately get a job, and you're a cashier, and you're constantly busy. And
Yep.
there's pros and cons for that, right? But one downside, in my opinion, when I travel to Europe and coming back, I notice harsh contrast. Here, you get a really kind of shoddy, barely moving. If you can fog a mirror, you have a job. Things are not happening. Like you say, it's not a high touch environment. It's like you get really bare bones. You know, nice people. There are people who, but there are a lot of people who don't want to do that. Don't want to be there. They're forced to be in some low-paying minimum wage job. They're pissed off, right? They're not happy. But hey, that's how the cookie crumbles. You must have a job, and this is now optimizing for utilization. We need to have all the people utilized at all times for various reasons, and there are some good sides to it, right? But it creates this sharp contrast. When I, for example, travel to Europe, I get a much better service.
Yeah.
People who work the job, they really are interested in doing it. They give you at least that's my experience. I don't want to generalize, but I see the sharp contrast between, like you say, everybody has to be super busy all the time, utilize everything, bam, 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 things are moving, versus more a boutique style, high touch service where you go and you get some quality. Maybe you pay a little bit more, but hey, it's memorable experience versus being frustrating and like, they brush me off, and So anyway,
and when you get back into the office, I totally get that. And it's when you get into the office, if everyone's busy, then you can't see your bottleneck. You can't see the. It's like instead of three tomatoes going for a walk, and it's obvious which ones are slow. It's like a swarm of tomatoes going for a walk, and they're all stomping over each other, and you can't see where the slowest one is. And of course, the metaphor is a bit stretched there. But in the office, if everyone is busy, and that's the cultural expectation, and it so often is, and it's very hard to slow them down, you can't see the bottleneck. And then when you do manage to untangle and find the bottleneck, and it's just then you go, you suddenly realize everyone's trying to go faster than it, but that can't actually work. It can't work. Everyone's trying to go faster. So you have to slow them down. You have to do two things. You have to speed up the bottleneck, and you have to slow everyone else, because most problems happen because the organizations try and run their systems much faster than they actually can, and the speed that they can run that is the speed of the bottleneck. So the reality is that I'm gonna, if you can do 50 units per hour, whatever that might mean, but everyone else, your bottleneck can do 50, everyone else can do over 80. They're going to try and run the organization at the speed of 80 plus, and that will cause the bottleneck. Usually there'll be all sorts of problems, and they usually appear as lots of stuff that gets started and not finished, and even more insidious, a huge amount of quality problems, and rework and mistakes, and sometimes lost lives even happen because they run the system faster than it can, which is faster than the bottleneck. So that's why you need to do both. You need to slow down the system so that it doesn't cause all this work, which is so counterintuitive, and you have to speed up the bottleneck. And then there's a little secret bit that you want to do. You want to see if you can move the bottleneck strategically to a place where it's palatable for it to be running at, say, 80 or 90% capacity, so they've still got wiggle room and time to think, and you want it palatable for everyone else to not be crazy busy. So you end up as a process coming in and looking, going, where's the bottleneck? Okay, I found it. Now let's slow everything down a little bit, and we'll try and speed up the whole system by speeding up the bottleneck. And that gives you improvement. And then you look at the last S on the focus formula is actually start again strategically. And so you go, I can see the bottleneck. Now, where do I want it to be? And if you can put it somewhere where it's culturally palatable for people upstream of it to have, say, time for thinking, where they don't actually have to be busy, or in a constant rush and cutting corners, and the same with people downstream, then you end up with a system where it's sustainable to have a bottleneck, which is busy, and others where they're busy keeping the bottleneck working well. And if I can just give you a little example, I have a personal assistant, MJ, and before I got her working for me, I spoke to my coach, and he said, "You need to get you need to get an assistant." And I go, "Oh, I don't want to get an assistant," and I feel embarrassed repeating this. I don't want to get an assistant because I don't want someone that I'll just have to be keeping busy all the time. And he looked at me as if to say, "Did you not write a book called The Bottleneck Rules, which talks about keeping people busy has been ridiculous?" And then, but he didn't say anything. He just said, "Are you sure their job would be for you to keep them busy and not for them to keep you busy?" And I go, "Oh," and it's so silly. So my assistant does a wonderful job of keeping me busy enough. She does stuff that I don't want to do, which is like the collaboration. She coordinates me. She does some really, really good stuff. But the most lovely bit is that she works, I'm not sure how long she works, but she doesn't work. She's not very busy, and but she's made me far more productive because I'm the strategic choice of bottleneck in my business. And I shouldn't be there trying to keep her busy. That would just be silly. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, what's the word? Synchronicity or something. I just had on Saturday, I attended a party and I was talking with one gentleman. He told me almost identical story. His wife has an assistant, a very capable one, and she has some free cycles, and she suggested to her husband, "Why don't you use her?" Like, "No, I don't want to manage anyone." And then somehow she talked him into it, and all of a sudden she realized, this is dawning of a new world for me. All of a sudden, I'm so much more powerful. Exactly what you're describing.
Yeah.
Serendipity, what's the word that, like, because you were talking, I'm like, did I already discuss this with you? I was trying to remember.
I know what you mean. There is a word. It could be serendipity, actually. Certainly coincidence of some. Yeah.
Because it's so fresh, and it's almost like you and I spoke before. And like, who was it? Oh no, it was Paul, the guy who told me, an exactly same story. So just quickly, I wanna interject, if you don't mind.
Go for it.
You know, I'm trying to present to my team a formula which I call being busy is not a solution.
Right.
Right. Now, but I empathize, because I know that if I am sitting in some team, and if I am being idle, I start worrying. And there's even an adage that says the hardest work is idle work. And you start really, stewing inside, and I'm like, should I update my resume? Should I start looking around for another job? Maybe they're thinking of getting rid of me, right? So people like to be busy. That's a fact. But if we were to accommodate that being constantly busy, we create a situation where it's not good for anyone, right? Like you said. And now the quality goes down the drain, and you may even tank the very business that's feeding you, right? So the challenge really is, like you say, how to keep people busy, but not in the sense that it's insanely packed, right? And another example is, because sometimes I teach mob programming. I don't know if you heard about mob programming.
No.
Mob programming is the latest breakthrough in software development world, where it consists of everybody on the team who is building a software product get together in the room. It could be virtual room, doesn't have to be physical room because of the pandemic that's behind it. And then we pick one issue to solve, whatever it may be.
Okay. Oh, yeah, and you swarm on it.
But you don't swarm like chaotically. You pick a driver. It's called also keyboardless programming. There's only one computer, only one screen in the room.
Okay. Yeah.
Everybody else is sitting without any equipment. There is a whiteboard. There is one screen, one keyboard. There is you pick a driver, and you pick a navigator. The driver stands at the keyboard. The navigator stands at the whiteboard, And it's same as when you're driving. The navigator is navigating, the driver is listening to the navigator. The driver is not allowed to make decisions. It's not like the driver, oh, I'm going to turn left. No, you listen to the instructions, and if the navigator says, now turn left, you turn left. Now you turn. Okay. So that's nice. And the clincher or the secret sauce of mob programming is in the musical chairs. It's on timer. So every 5 minutes, the timer rings.
Okay.
The driver gets up, the navigator sits at the keyboard, the driver becomes the navigator for the next 5 minutes, and then we go around and around the room. So eventually everybody gets to be both the driver and the navigator.
Okay.
And it turns out that this, in my experience, creates the most highest quality solution, more than any individual super brilliant person can deliver.
Right.
Plus, in that arrangement, this is full collaboration. There are no choking points or inspection gates, because any review, any agreement, because all the people who make a decision, is it good enough to be put in front of a customer or not, are in the room right now. Good. And I'm like, we're not going to leave this session until we get to the point where we say, okay, is it good enough or not? And if it's good, it goes in front of the customer. So that way, we abolish all these bottlenecks. And
you got no queues. Yeah.
The worst thing is when you put something on a queue, not even God himself knows when it's going to get picked up. It's undeterministic. It's like anybody's guess. It could be picked up in the next 5 minutes, in the next 5 days. People are chasing after people. Please, can you drop whatever you're doing? I need this reviewed. Look, man, I'm busy. I'm sorry, I cannot. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe on Monday. It's unnerving. And so that's why I like your book. I think it's really focused on solving this problem where we are, as a manager, I'm expected to be to deliver predictable results, but I can't if things are put on a queue. It's anybody's guess. So I'm kind of shooting in the dark, right? So I just wanted to illustrate that, going back to your concept of collaboration, that I think the most valuable collaboration, sometimes people confuse collaboration and communication. Like, yeah, we're collaborating, we're sending emails, we're sending messages. That's not collaboration, that's communication. Lower grade interaction. Collaboration is face-to-face with a problem in hand. And mob programming is also very, very important aspect is bias for action. So if we're making changes to the code and somebody disagrees, we're not debating theory. You disagree by asking the code to be changed and see what happens.
Okay. Yep.
So bias for action, not for theoretical discussion.
Right.
So sorry, I took too much of the time, but I wanted to.
No, that's good. That's good. Good. Cool.
Elaborate that it is important to let people know that it is okay not to be constantly productive, but to be able not to feel idle. We should, as managers, we should find ways for them to engage them in other things. Go over there, learn, try to help these in operation guys, try to help them troubleshoot something, try to help them configure the system. I know it's not your forte, but hey, give them a hand. Like you say, maybe you have skills to build some little utility that will speed things up for them, right? So you don't have to be constantly just sticking to your job description, right?
Yeah, that's so true. I once had a big success story turned around and turned almost into a failure. It was maybe about 80 developers, and I sort of had rescued them, got them running in a pretty good pretty good way. They looked a bit like an ugly duckling. They weren't beautiful and looked like a swan, but they had potential and they were running really well and they were building a new business. And then in the business side, the manager in charge of this initiative left. Someone else came in, and he was used to running call centers. And he came in and he said, "Oh, these computer people, they're all too slow. I need them to go faster." And somehow he managed to convince or influence or bully or command or something. I don't know how he managed to get this past people, but he insisted that everyone in the IT organization started filling out spreadsheets which recorded their level of utilization on a day-by-day basis. So they had to basically record what they did, and it had to sum up to 40 hours. So suddenly it created this impetus to be busy, or at least to look busy in a spreadsheet. And it made layers of people who shouldn't have been busy, knew they shouldn't have been, but still recorded that they were. And so it created this really sort of unpleasant, and it just slowed everything down because suddenly it created everyone busy. And so if you can just imagine that, I got it to the point with the developers with the bottleneck, which is where you want developers to do the bottleneck, so everyone upstream has time to think and prepare stuff and give it to them, so that they don't get rubbish given to them. You want testers to be not the bottleneck, so that they can give fast feedback. So just imagine that very simplistic view there, and suddenly you had all the analysts starting lots of work. And studying lots and lots just to keep themselves busy, so that they could record, a number, the tracking number, and how many hours that they did, and all the numbers added up to 40 hours a week. And what should have happened, what was happening was before, was that no one was tracking anything. There were no numbers, nothing had to add up, but the analysts who were feeding the developers were concentrating on making sure that the developers got good work in a timely fashion, good inputs that were really well thought out, well designed. They were as small as they possibly could be. They trimmed the fat, but instead, everyone, by keeping busy, they just fed junk into the developers. Not junk, lower quality stuff that was usually a lot bigger, and it really just flooded the developers, and everything slowed down. But that was that utilization. Got to keep everyone busy, and that was that managers, that executives' belief was that the way you get productivity out of a team of knowledge workers is to keep them all busy, and all being as productive as they can. To loop it right back to the start. Whereas what you've got to do is you've got to go, there's my bottleneck. I need to make sure they get high quality inputs, so that you don't waste their time either producing rubbish or never getting to stuff because they're so busy producing stuff that's actually hasn't been thought through properly and is way too big. So
when this just illustrates from my angle, whenever I try and push for this mob programming and collaboration in real time, biggest possible pushback. People are like, are you crazy? So we will have all these highly paid people working on only one thing at a time. It's just madness. How much they're costing us? I'd much rather scatter them and everybody working on their own thing, like in parallel, right? So they don't value. So my retort to that, or my comeback, is like, yeah, I understand. Imagine if we had like a group of firefighters sitting doing nothing. They're gonna go and start some fires because we want to. Why are we paying them? Let them go out, start fires, and fight those fires. I want to utilize them. Like I cannot stand it when they're just sitting there playing cards. Like, come on, these guys are expensive. So that type of.
There might be a little bit. I can't help you solve that problem, but I can. There's certainly some things. Maybe in a week, maybe there's some things that really, really, really warrant the team to mob. And let's say that in a 40-hour week, a 5-day week, let's say there could be a half a day in that week, maybe spread over 2 or 3 days, perhaps just bits here and there. I don't know what the right percentage is, where it's totally palatable for everyone to go, no, we need to mob now. And the reason we need to do that is it's because it's like there is a fire. And we all need to focus and get our brains on that, and then maybe because it's just really important, and people can buy into that.
Sorry to interrupt. It's already happening. It's called all hands on deck, and like you mentioned, it's happening when this life and death situation, the burning platform, the system crashed. We're losing customers. We're losing revenue. All of a sudden, all these highly paid experts gather and they work on one thing. How come that's not a problem then? And they solve it right there.
So I think the gap there, not the gap, maybe the wedge that helps you is to make sure that that happens some of the time, because all of the time will be unpalatable.
Yeah.
And maybe one day a week, spread over 5. So 1/5 of the time generally. Maybe that's the time where you do mob stuff, because it's really, really tricky. It just makes absolutely the right sense. It's not an emergency, but it's the most efficient way of getting stuff done. And then maybe you increase that over time. I just know people are going to. It's like when we used to have pair programming when it first came out. It was just totally unpalatable, and yet sometimes people would sit down and just naturally sit and work together, because they're working on stuff where it's far better to have 2 people's brains on it, a navigator and a driver.
I can tell you, Clarke, I had situations where people were kicking and screaming and like, no, we don't want to do this. And I'm like, okay, let's give it a try. Let's give it a couple of hours. And sometimes the biggest, naysayers and people who are like, this is stupid, would leave the session saying, Alex, I can't wait to do this again. But
that's really cool. Yeah.
You cannot envision it unless you attend and experience on your own skin. It cannot be. It's very interesting. It's something. When I first read about it, I thought that's the stupidest thing ever. Like, come on, who could come up with this? But then I'm like Kent Beck. I don't know if you know Kent Beck. So Kent Beck's talking about some guy proposing some outlandish idea, and he says it was so bad that I had to try it. Because if I read something that makes sense, I know somebody already tried it. So, but it's something that's like so out of this world. I had to try it, right?
I like that.
And so I was the same as mob program. Come on, I have to try it. So I got the chance to try it, and really, you have to. It's I don't know. It's like first kiss or jumping, learning how to swim. Unless you really get into it, you can read books, you can talk. It doesn't register, right? So the challenge is to get people to collaborate face to face, which is counterintuitive, right? But I can just tell you a quick anecdote. In the olden times, there was a small European country, agriculturally most, and stuff. But they eventually fought, and they got a court with a king and all these other things. And but because they were not very sophisticated, the court was not that sophisticated. But then some people who traveled to France and Germany, etc., they came back and said, "Your Majesty, you have to have a court orchestra, because we went there and they had their own musicians." And I mean, that's how you and he's like, I don't know what it is. So they like, no, let's hire some musicians, let's get them in, and while you're eating dinner, they will be playing, and it's sophisticated and so classy. So okay, he agreed. And so they got musicians on. The king sat down for dinner, and then they started playing, and he's like, okay. He's like, why is not everybody playing? He's like, I'm playing. So he insisted everybody must play at all times. So that's optimizing for utilization. Of course, it's cacophony, right? It's not music, but
never thought of that. You get the orchestra play. That's really clever, actually. Never heard that one. Love it.
Imagine going to opera and like I paid like 100 whatever.
Yeah, get them all singing at once.
Some people are standing there doing nothing, waiting their turn. No. I want everybody singing, everybody playing. Or you watch a soccer game. I want 11 balls, everybody kicking their own ball. Only one ball? Come on, man. This is underutilized. All the players kicking ball, dribbling at all times. So that's how we have now in many teams. Like I want all the people clacking the keyboard at all times.
Clack, clack, clack. Yeah.
Clack, and I'm happy. I know we're productive.
Doesn't matter. Yes, as long as it's noisy. Yeah.
Because, people measure outputs. How many lines of code? How many story points? How many bugs have you fixed? How many stories have you delivered? Why? Because it's so easy to measure. But they should be measuring outcomes, but outcomes are trickier to measure.
Oh, so much.
Right? Yeah. And sometimes it takes its own gestation until the outcome manifests itself, right? But at the end of the day, that's the only thing that matters. Because I could be using ChatGPT and writing millions of lines of code, and now I'm the richest developer. And this code is not doing anything, right? Yeah. Or doing something bad. But, so anyway, back to you. If you can continue, please, with some of your anecdotes or views, I would love to.
I have to go in just a couple of minutes. I have a call that's starting.
Sure. Yeah.
But can I just actually tell you something a little bit just about this that might sort of bounce off that. That when I wrote this, it's a little skin, you know, it's a quick read. The week before I published it, it was twice as thick. And then I went through and I looked at it and I thought, it gets boring about halfway through. At least it did to me. I'm sure maybe other people, but it was just, it changed the tone, and it was much more of a, there was just more detail, more and more elaboration on it. And then I was in Scrivener, which is my writing software. I was in that, and I selected the second half of the book because there was two distinct halves. I selected the second half and I moved the second half down into the archive. Then I went into it and I pulled the last chapter up and I put it back into the main part of the book. And I looked at the word count, and I'd gone from about 35,000 words, which is a short book, down to 17,000. And I thought, and I just knew at that moment that even though it was half the book, I just thought, this is 10 times as valuable. And it was an instinct. And I just knew, though, as the author who was curating this book and designing it and looking at it, I just knew it was 10 times as valuable, and it was just so much better. But it was half the size.
Yeah.
And that's maybe the difference between outputs and outcomes. That you could judge a book by the price divided by the number of words. Number of words per cent wouldn't be a very good way of judging a book. But with this one, you know, I'm not sure, it's got 4.6, I think, on Amazon, with the star rating, because it's actually short, and I gave people less stuff. But I also saved everyone probably an hour and a half's worth of reading by doing that. So it's just really interesting there that you again compare the quantity versus the quality. It all comes down to that quality. There's a diminishing return on quality.
Yeah.
I
can attest to that, because I read a lot of books, and your book is one of the very rare books that I went and read the second time. And I bet you it was long. If it were longer, I would be like, yeah, maybe I would not now.
Yeah.
But now, because it's so short, I'm like, yeah, sure, I'm going to go rifle again through that, because as I was reading, I was getting excited and I missed minor points. I want to go back and recheck.
Yep.
Because the tone of the book and the flow is so, you know, generous and so like easy going at the same time. But you know, you are getting nutritional material. It's not like empty calories, right?
Yes.
So I have to go back and read again, right?
And that was the hard bit. If you look at you actually, do I have I do. The Goal. So this is my favorite book of all time, which is the original sort of theory constraints book, and it was written for a different purpose to what most people think. And I love this book, but I don't recommend it very often nowadays, except for people who, you know, are like me, just like this kind of thing. It's a wonderful book, but it's about two things mostly. It's about 100 zillion things, but it's about two things. One is bottlenecks, and the other is the financial stuff that's in it that's not obvious. Bottleneck comes in at the 50% point of the book. You have to do a lot of reading for that, and that when it was written was a really, really good way, because people didn't have books, were expensive, really expensive. You know, when this came out, and to have a book, people that read books would quite happily sit down, and it was a treat to have a good book. So he wrote a book. Ali wrote a book as a novel, and it was really novel and entertaining to read because of that. And you kind of pick stuff up, but you kind of left quite a little bit confused at the end of it. I've probably, I don't know, I've maybe read this 15 times, I would guess, over the years. And it sort of all started to make sense. But back then, the bottleneck in people's lives was probably things to do. So sitting down and actually reading a good book was easy to do. Nowadays, there's so much information, so much stuff that people now. That's why books will get shorter and shorter and shorter. But at the same time, people, if they saw those together for the same price in a bookshop, some people might go, oh, if this gives me the same stuff in half the time or a quarter of the time, that's brilliant. Other people might go, oh no, I get a lot more words for my value. And so it depends on how you value things and how much experience you've got. But that idea of more is better versus small is better, it's really, really counterintuitive. And I think it comes with age as you start to value your time more. And sorry, I'm not really saying that about comparing these two books, because they're different beasts. It's just more the utilization, keeping everyone busy, get more lines of code, bigger books. There's an awful lot of thinking about when you switch it into value. The most valuable people for books these days is probably a good experience that doesn't take too long. And that was kind of what drove me to write that, because I couldn't get people to read a 400-page book set in a 1970s factory. So that's why I wrote my own.
Yeah. But it's going back to what Mark Twain said. I apologize for the length of this letter because I had no time to make a shorter one, right?
Yes. It's so true. Yeah.
You know, but
I have another call, so I'm sorry, I have to go.
Thank you so much. Maybe we could continue later if you have some time. I'd like to pick your brain on a couple of new other concepts.
Yeah, cool. Well, send me an email.
Sure.
Apologies, my day just got really squished today. But that's really cool, Alex. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay,
Bye.
cheers.
Bye.